Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the frozen heart of British Columbia, through forgotten corners and isolated small towns, where endless wilderness stretches for miles and places exist where help does not reach. Here, 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories have unfolded, tales that will haunt even the bravest souls. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are documented encounters from ordinary people whose lives were forever changed. From abandoned cabins to creatures that should not exist. From basements hiding unspeakable secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight you will hear horrors that will chill you to your core. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Emma Holloway, and this happened when I moved to a tiny town called Pine Creek in northern British Columbia, hoping for a fresh start after a messy breakup. The town had a population barely over 400, a cluster of weathered wooden houses and endless pine forests that swallowed the horizon. At first, it felt peaceful. Too peaceful. Locals were polite but distant, their eyes carrying a strange weight, as if they were guarding secrets they didn't want shared. The first sign something was off came on my second night. I had unpacked my boxes, lit a fire in the fireplace, and settled into the quiet. At around 11:30 p.m., a soft tapping echoed from the window. I froze, thinking it was a branch swaying in the wind. Then I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable, repeating my name. My heart pounded as I pulled the curtains aside. Nothing. The forest loomed black and silent. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself small towns can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're lonely. But when I woke the next morning, I noticed the neighbor's cat lying in the snow, completely frozen, eyes wide open, and an eerie trail leading into the trees. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of something far more sinister. The trail from the frozen cat into the forest gnawed at my mind all day. I asked a neighbor, Mr. Lawson, about it while buying groceries. He gave me a blank stare and muttered, "Better not follow that path, Emma. Some things you don't want to find." I tried to brush it off, but his tone had a weight that pressed on me, leaving a chill I couldn't shake. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept hearing faint footsteps circling my house, scraping against the snow outside. Every time I mustered the courage to look, nothing was there. The tapping returned at exactly 11:33 p.m., louder this time, paired with the whispering. I swear I could make out a sentence. "Don't look behind you." My stomach twisted. On the third night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the snow, following the trail from the cat. The forest was silent except for the crunch of my boots. The trees grew denser, their branches scraping like skeletal fingers. The trail ended abruptly at an old, abandoned cabin I hadn't noticed before. Its door hung crooked, and the air smelled like rot. A sudden bang inside made me stumble back. I froze, realizing that whatever left that trail was still inside, watching. I stood frozen in the snow, flashlight trembling in my hand, staring at the dark cabin. Something inside shifted. Just a shadow, or maybe the wind. But my gut screamed it was alive. I wanted to run, but a morbid curiosity rooted me to the spot. The front door creaked slowly, inch by inch, as if inviting me in. My breath formed clouds in the cold night air, heart pounding in rhythm with the mysterious creak. Finally, I forced myself to step closer. The smell of damp wood and decay hit me like a wall. Inside, the floor was littered with old furniture, shattered glass, and piles of newspapers yellowed with age. The walls were scratched with deep, chaotic marks, like something, or someone, had clawed at them repeatedly. Then I noticed it. A series of small footprints in the dust, human size but oddly narrow, leading toward the back of the cabin. I followed them with a mixture of dread and fascination. At the rear, I saw a trapdoor partially hidden under a rug. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to leave. But something unexplainable drew me forward. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, the air around me growing heavier with each second. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. I opened the trapdoor, and a musty, suffocating darkness greeted me. The smell of mold and decay intensified as I shone the flashlight down the narrow staircase. The steps creaked under my weight, each sound echoing unnaturally. My pulse raced, every instinct begging me to turn back, yet I continued, compelled by some force I couldn't name. The stairs led to a basement-like room, walls damp and covered with blackened mold. In the center, a circle of odd symbols was scratched into the floor, surrounding what looked like a worn diary. I approached cautiously and picked it up, fingers trembling. The diary belonged to someone named Margaret, a woman who had lived in Pine Creek decades ago. Her entries spoke of nightly whispers in the forest, people vanishing without trace, and shadows that moved independently. Suddenly, a cold gust slammed the trapdoor shut above me. I banged on it, panicking. But the sound of whispering surrounded me from every corner of the basement. Words I couldn't fully understand seeped into my ears. You shouldn't be here. Leave or join them. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something standing just behind me. A figure so dark it absorbed all light. I froze, my flashlight barely illuminating the room, my ears straining to catch the whispers that circled me. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze, heavy, oppressive, and terrifyingly intent. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the diary, which fell open to a page that chilled me to the bone. It described the disappearance of children, neighbors, and even travelers, all linked to that very cabin. Each story ended with the same warning. Do not awaken what sleeps beneath Pine Creek. Panic surged. I tried to pry the trapdoor open, my hands slippery from sweat and fear, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, phrases intertwining in a language I couldn't comprehend. Then I felt a cold touch on my shoulder, a hand, icy and unnatural. I whipped around, but the corner was empty. My heart raced uncontrollably. I realized then that this wasn't just a haunted house or local legend. Whatever lingered here fed on curiosity, on fear, on those foolish enough to wander into its domain. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the air thickened, making it hard to inhale. Somewhere in the darkness, I felt it inch closer, and I knew my choices had dwindled. Stay and confront it, or risk the unknown outside. Desperation overtook fear. I slammed my shoulder against the trapdoor with all my strength, but it barely budged. The whispering reached a deafening crescendo, voices overlapping, echoing off the stone walls. Then, just as suddenly, silence. My flashlight flickered one last time, and I saw it. A shape crouched in the far corner, humanoid but impossibly twisted, eyes glowing faint red, limbs bending at unnatural angles. I stumbled backward, slipping on the cold, damp floor. And in that instant, the figure lunged. I scrambled to my feet, racing up the steps as the trapdoor seemed to pulse beneath my hands, as if resisting my escape. I burst into the night, lungs burning, snow crunching underfoot. adrenaline propelling me forward without a glance back. Behind me, the cabin loomed dark and silent, but I could feel it watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, my mind raced with disbelief. Did I just imagine it? The frozen cat's trail, the diary, the whispering. No, it was all real. Pine Creek had secrets, dark ones older than the town itself. I learned that night that some places are alive and some horrors are patient, waiting for the curious to stumble into their grip. The next morning, my mind was foggy, and exhaustion weighed on me like a heavy blanket. I avoided the forest, sticking close to the small town streets, but Pine Creek's residents kept a careful distance, their eyes darting toward the trees as if the forest itself demanded respect. When I asked about the cabin, no one would give a straight answer. Mr. Lawson muttered something about old horrors that never sleep before quickly retreating into his house. That's when I realized the town itself was trapped in fear. Pine Creek's quiet streets hid generations of secrets, all linked to that cabin in the woods. Nightfall brought new terror. From my bedroom window, I saw the same shadow move along the tree line, just beyond the dim glow of street lamps. Its red eyes pierced the darkness, and I knew it was the same entity from the basement. But this time, it wasn't alone. Multiple figures, twisted, silent, and inhuman, emerged from the woods, moving with a predatory grace. My pulse spiked as I understood that the forest had claimed more than just the cat, more than Margaret's victims. Whatever lived there, it was patient, organized, and always hungry. I barricaded myself inside, but sleep eluded me. Each shadow that passed my window felt like a warning, a promise that curiosity could never be undone. Pine Creek was alive, and it would not forgive. By the fourth night, desperation pushed me toward the forest again. I needed answers. I needed proof. I grabbed my coat, a flashlight, and the diary, following the faint trail the cat had left. The trees seemed denser, darker, and alive, whispering in voices that weren't human. The footprints led me back to the cabin, but this time, the trapdoor was open, as if inviting me in. My stomach twisted in dread, but I stepped forward, determined to confront the horror that had haunted me for days. Inside, the basement was empty, yet the air vibrated with a low, almost musical hum. Symbols glowed faintly on the floor, pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows swirled around me, forming shapes that hinted at faces, pleading, angry, accusing. The diary slipped from my hands, flipping open to a blank page that suddenly filled with fresh ink. The curious always return. You belong now. My flashlight died, plunging me into total darkness. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and hands, dozens of icy, invisible hands, grabbed me from all sides. I ran blindly, bursting through the trapdoor into the snow, gasping for air. Behind me, the cabin seemed to dissolve into the forest itself, swallowing the trail and erasing every clue of its existence. I ran through the forest blindly, snow crunching beneath my boots, lungs burning, the diary clutched to my chest. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting and reaching for me, whispers echoing through the trees, repeating my name over and over. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. When I finally reached the main road, I thought I was safe. But the street lamps flickered violently, and I noticed something horrifying. The shadows of the forest stretched unnaturally, as if the trees themselves were leaning toward me. A distant scream split the night, piercing and guttural, followed by silence. My mind raced. The diary trembled in my hands, pages fluttering until one snapped open to reveal a single line written in blood-red ink. No one leaves Pine Creek. I realized that the entity, or whatever it was, didn't just inhabit the cabin. It controlled the town's very edges. Every resident, every whisper, every shadow was a part of its watchful presence. The horror wasn't confined to the forest. It extended through the snow-covered streets, the houses, and even the warm glow of the town lights. I knew I had been marked, and every instinct screamed that my escape was only temporary. The forest didn't forgive, and curiosity had made me its prey. The next morning, I tried to leave Pine Creek, packed and ready to abandon my apartment and the nightmare forever. As I drove down the empty, snow-lined road, my rearview mirror caught a glimpse of movement. Figures standing among the trees, watching silently. I blinked, and they were gone, but I knew what I had seen. Weeks later, I returned briefly to check on the cabin, but it had vanished. No sign of a path, no footprints, no trapdoor, nothing. The town seemed normal, almost disturbingly cheerful, as if nothing had ever happened. But I could feel it in the air, in the quiet whispers carried by the wind through the pines. Pine Creek had claimed a part of me, something I would never recover. The diary remained on my desk, open to a blank page, occasionally filling itself with ink when I wasn't looking. I left British Columbia shortly after, but the memories haunt me daily. Curiosity is dangerous in Pine Creek. Some things wait patiently, and when you stumble across them, you never truly escape. My name is Daniel Fraser, and this happened the summer I took a seasonal job as a ranger at Blackwater Lake in British Columbia. The lake was beautiful by day, dark, glassy waters reflecting towering pine forests. But by night, it became something else entirely. The locals warned me not to stay late near the water after sundown. They spoke in hushed tones about strange disappearances, boats found empty, and voices echoing across the lake that didn't belong to anyone alive. I laughed it off at first. I thought I was a rational man, immune to ghost stories. The first night, I patrolled the shoreline alone, lantern in hand, the mist curling over the water like smoke. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, crunching on the gravel path, though no one was there. My head snapped around. Nothing. Then came the whisper, "Daniel? Daniel?" Soft, almost pleading, yet hollow. My stomach churned, but I convinced myself it was the wind. Hours later, when I returned to the ranger cabin, I found small ripples across the lake, though there was no breeze. And then, in the mud by the dock, I saw footprints. Barefoot, elongated, too wide to be human, leading straight into the water, disappearing beneath the black surface. Something was in the lake, and it was waiting. The next evening, curiosity gnawed at me despite the warnings. I brought a small rowboat to the lake, hoping to investigate the footprints. The air was thick, heavy, and unnaturally still. As I paddled out, the water felt icy against the boat, even though the summer heat should have warmed it. Around midnight, fog rolled across the lake, obscuring the tree line, turning the world into a gray void. That's when I heard it. A splash, subtle at first, then growing louder, circling the boat. My heart pounded. I shone the lantern into the mist, but saw nothing. Then, a voice emerged from the fog, whispering my name again, closer this time, dripping with malice. The surface of the water erupted in small waves, forming shapes, hints of faces staring up at me, mouths open in silent screams. I tried to row away, but the oars felt impossibly heavy, as if the lake itself was resisting me. I caught sight of something moving just beneath the water, a dark, elongated form, too large to be any fish. It rose briefly, a humanoid shape with empty, black eyes, then vanished again. Panic surged through me. I realized the lake was alive, and it had chosen me as its next target. I barely made it back to shore that night, shaking and soaked, my hands trembling as I pulled the boat onto dry land. Every instinct screamed that I should leave Blackwater Lake immediately, but something rooted me there. A mix of fear, disbelief, and a morbid fascination. I spent the rest of the night trying to make sense of what I had seen. Fish? No. A person? Impossible. And yet, those footprints, the ripples, the faces in the water, they were real. The following day, I attempted to speak with the locals, but they avoided my eyes, offering vague warnings about the lake's past. I discovered that for decades, Blackwater Lake had been linked to strange drownings and disappearances, always under mysterious circumstances. Children, hikers, even seasoned fishermen. Some returned, disoriented and silent. Others vanished entirely. Everyone whispered about a dark presence in the water, but none would elaborate. Night fell again, and I couldn't resist the pull of the lake. I set up a small observation post near the dock. Flashlight ready, camera rolling. Around midnight, I saw movement. Ripples forming in patterns too deliberate to be natural. The voice returned, closer this time, more insistent. Daniel. I realized then that the lake was communicating, beckoning, and I was not just a witness. I was the next participant in whatever ritual it demanded. As the night deepened, the ripples grew violent, forming concentric circles that seemed almost alive. I aimed my flashlight at the center and froze. A pale, elongated figure emerged from the black water, dripping and silent, eyes hollow and fixed on me. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the camera. It didn't move like a human. It glided, unnaturally fast, with limbs bending in impossible angles. Panic surged. I stumbled backward, tripping over rocks and roots, yet the figure advanced steadily, relentless. Then I heard it, a chorus of whispers rising from beneath the water, echoing in my mind. Join us. Belong to the lake. Forever. I scrambled to the car, heart hammering, only to find the road along the shoreline warped, shadows stretching like fingers to block my escape. The camera had fallen and captured it all. Ripples transforming into distorted faces, shadows of previous victims peering from the mist. And the figure, still silent, moving closer. I realized that the lake wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, intelligent, and patient. And tonight, it had chosen me to understand why so many had disappeared over the years. I spent the next day recovering at the ranger cabin, drenched in fear and confusion. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every shadow in the forest seemed to move with intention. My mind replayed the lake's pale figure, the ripples forming those twisted faces, and the whispers echoing in my head. I realized that Blackwater Lake didn't just exist. It observed, it waited, and it chose its victims carefully. That night, I returned to the dock with a flashlight and a sense of inevitability. I felt drawn to the water, as if an invisible force compelled me forward. The mist rolled in thick and heavy, wrapping around my legs like icy fingers. Then I heard the voice again, louder, now unmistakably urgent. Daniel, come closer. My heart pounded, but I stepped forward anyway, unable to resist. The water shifted violently as something beneath it stirred. The elongated humanoid rose again, this time accompanied by more shapes, shadowy silhouettes that glimmered just beneath the surface. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping with urgent urgency, commanding and pleading simultaneously. I knew that if I didn't leave now, the lake would claim me. Yet, some part of me, curiosity, foolishness or madness, kept me rooted in place, staring into the abyss. The moment I leaned too far over the dock, the lake erupted. Black water splashed violently, drenching me as cold hands seemed to grip my ankles, pulling me forward. I screamed and kicked, finally breaking free, but the water hissed and churned as if alive, obeying an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. The elongated figure rose completely, dripping and silent, eyes fixed on mine, while shadows circled around me like wolves, ready to strike. I backed away, but the dock seemed endless, stretching unnaturally, as if the lake itself was warping reality to trap me. The whispers returned, now clear. Join us. Belong to the lake. Forever. The phrase echoed in my head with terrifying clarity, overriding rational thought. I realized this was no ordinary haunting. The lake had a will, a hunger, and it was patient, waiting for the right moment to claim its prey. In a surge of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted toward the cabin, chest burning, eyes stinging from the cold mist. Behind me, the lake's surface rippled unnaturally, black shapes rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern, as if mocking my escape. I understood then that Blackwater Lake was not just a location. It was a predator, ancient, cunning, and unstoppable. I didn't stop running until I reached the ranger cabin, gasping for breath, soaked through and shaking uncontrollably. The whispers lingered in my mind, and even inside the safety of the cabin, I could feel the lake watching me, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, that fear had twisted my senses. But the camera footage I reviewed told a different story. Ripples forming faces, shadowy humanoids emerging from the water, and the pale figure moving toward the dock. It was all captured in vivid detail. Determined to understand, I dug deeper into the lake's history. Blackwater Lake had long been shrouded in mystery. Locals spoke of rituals performed decades ago, sacrifices meant to appease the lake. Bodies had washed ashore with expressions frozen in terror, their disappearance never explained. Each record hinted at a sentient presence, one that demanded attention and fear in equal measure. That night, I heard a tapping on the cabin window. I froze. Outside, in the mist, multiple shadowy figures emerged from the forest edge, their forms distorted, leaning unnaturally toward the building. My heart pounded. I realized the lake's influence extended far beyond its surface. The creatures weren't confined to the water. They could reach into the town, into the forest, into me. Fear gave way to resolve. I knew I had to confront whatever haunted the lake if I wanted to survive. I grabbed a flashlight, the diary I'd recovered from the lake's edge, and a rope, determined to investigate further. As I approached the water, the mist thickened, and the air grew heavy, almost sentient, pressing against my chest with each step. Ripples began to form around the dock, coalescing into shapes more solid than before, faces contorted in silent screams, eyes glowing faint red. The pale figure rose fully from the water, staring directly at me as if weighing my worth. Then, more shapes emerged, dozens of them, circling, moving in perfect synchrony. I realized that the lake had been collecting these souls, shaping them into its guardians. The whispers returned, louder, insistent, demanding that I join them. I hesitated, heart hammering, knowing that giving in meant losing myself forever. But standing my ground seemed equally dangerous. Summoning every ounce of courage, I shouted at the lake, "I will not belong to you." The surface roiled violently, figures lunging forward, and for a moment, I felt an icy hand brush against my arm. Then, the mist thickened, and everything went silent, as if the lake were reconsidering its claim. I barely had time to process the silence before the water erupted again. The pale figure and its shadowy companions surged toward me, moving faster than thought, limbs bending at impossible angles. The whispers grew deafening, echoing inside my skull. Join us. Belong to the lake. Forever. I swung my flashlight wildly, trying to strike something tangible, but the light barely penetrated the thick mist. In a desperate moment, I remembered the diary. Flipping through its pages, I found a ritual, an incantation to repel the lake's grasp, written by someone who had survived decades ago. My hands trembled as I read the words aloud, each syllable tasting of fear. The water around me churned violently, shadows screaming silently, and the pale figure recoiled as if burned by the sound. For a brief moment, everything stilled. The whispers faded, ripples calmed, and the shapes dissolved into the dark water. I stumbled backward, exhausted, soaked, heart racing. It was as if the lake had tested me, probing my courage, and for now, I had survived. But I knew the calm was temporary. The lake was patient, and its hunger eternal. By dawn, the mist lifted, and the lake's surface became deceptively calm. I collapsed on the shore, shivering, soaked, and trying to comprehend the night's events. Blackwater Lake seemed innocent now, a mirror of the brightening sky, but I knew better. Its hunger was patient, its intelligence cunning, and it would wait until the next fool wandered too close. Weeks later, I left the ranger post, returning to the city with a lingering unease. I kept the diary, now filled with warnings and marks I hadn't written. Occasionally, at night, I swear I hear whispers from running water, faintly calling my name. The lake had marked me, and I would never escape its presence entirely. Some things are ancient, intelligent, and evil, and Blackwater Lake was one of them. Curiosity, I had learned, is fatal when facing the sentient darkness lurking in the wilderness of British Columbia. Even now, whenever I see a calm lake, a dark instinct rises in me, reminding me of the night I stared into Blackwater Lake's abyss and lived to tell the tale. But survival doesn't mean escape, and its hunger remains. My name is Laura Bennett, and this happened the fall. I took a hiking trip to Maple Ridge, a remote small town in British Columbia. I had always loved the woods, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the quiet whispers of nature. But nothing had prepared me for the oppressive silence that settled over the forest as soon as I crossed the ridge. The locals warned me about the woods, murmuring about people disappearing and strange shadows that moved when no one was looking. I dismissed their stories, assuming they were exaggerations to scare tourists. The first night, I set up camp near a clearing, a small fire crackling to keep me company. As darkness fell, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No wind rustled the leaves, no animal stirred, only the oppressive stillness that pressed against my senses. Around midnight, I heard a faint snap, like a branch breaking under a heavy footstep. I froze, eyes scanning the black forest beyond my firelight, but saw nothing. Then came the whispers, soft, almost human, but fragmented. "Laura, come closer." I gripped my flashlight and peered into the darkness. Shadows shifted unnaturally among the trees, twisting as if alive. I realized, with growing dread, that I was not alone. The forest was watching, and whatever lurked in its depths had taken an interest in me. Sleep was impossible. Every crackle of a branch made me jump. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Around 1:15 a.m., I noticed movement beyond the firelight. A dark, humanoid figure standing perfectly still among the trees, watching. My heart pounded, legs frozen. I whispered to myself that it had to be another hiker, someone playing a prank. But the figure didn't move, didn't blink. and seemed to dissolve into the shadows the longer I stared. I tried to ignore it, but then the whispers returned, now louder, almost commanding. "Laura, step closer. Follow." A cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing my fire. I fumbled with matches, panic rising, when the figure moved suddenly, gliding between trees with impossible speed. My instincts screamed to run, yet I was paralyzed by fear and fascination. Suddenly, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Roots twisted like serpents, forming patterns that weren't natural. I felt a pull, subtle at first, then urgent, drawing me toward the forest's depths. The whispering grew insistent, overlapping with a low hum, vibrating in my chest. I realized the woods were alive, sentient, and patient, and they had chosen me as their next victim. I forced myself to move, stumbling through the underbrush as the whispering grew louder and more insistent. Shadows darted between the trees, flitting just beyond my vision, leaving trails of darkness that seemed to linger even after they passed. The forest felt endless, twisting unnaturally, as if it were alive, reshaping itself to keep me inside. Every step forward was met with resistance, snapping branches, roots curling underfoot, and the cold, suffocating sensation of being watched. Then I saw them. Small, almost childlike figures emerging from the trees, their faces pale, eyes hollow, mouths moving in silent screams. I froze, stomach churning, but they didn't approach me directly. Instead, they circled, moving in erratic patterns, disappearing and reappearing deeper in the shadows. My rational mind screamed that they were hallucinations brought on by fear. But deep down, I knew better. These were real, and they were tied to the forest's dark will. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural growl rumbled through the woods, vibrating in my chest. It wasn't an animal. It was something intelligent, waiting, calculating. I knew I had to find the clearing I had camped in, or risk being trapped here forever, consumed by whatever ancient presence lurked in the silent woods. Panic overtook me as I realized the forest was no longer familiar. The trail back to my campsite had vanished, replaced by twisted roots and looming trees that hadn't been there before. I could hear the whispers all around me, overlapping, growing louder, some pleading, some angry. "Join us. Belong to the woods." The childlike figures appeared closer now, their movements synchronized, eerily deliberate, forming a grotesque pattern that seemed to point me in a direction I did not wish to follow. I ran blindly, branches slapping against my arms and face, roots tangling my feet, until I stumbled into a small clearing. The fire pit of my campsite had been completely erased, leaving nothing but disturbed earth and faintly glowing symbols carved into the soil. My flashlight illuminated scratches on the surrounding trees, marks that resembled faces twisted in terror. The realization hit me like ice. This forest didn't just consume people. It altered the very land, reshaping reality around those it trapped. A cold wind blew, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of laughter, childlike, warped, echoing unnaturally through the forest. I felt the forest's gaze, heavy and intelligent, assessing me, testing my fear. I had survived this long, but the silent woods were far from finished with me. I pressed on, fear twisting my stomach into knots as the forest seemed to close in around me. Every tree appeared taller, every shadow darker, as if the woods themselves were reshaping to trap me. The whispers now had a rhythm, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat synchronized with mine. I caught glimpses of figures among the trees, tall, thin, impossibly still, their faces blank but hauntingly familiar, like reflections of people I had seen in town. My mind screamed that I needed to escape, but my legs refused to move with purpose. The forest wanted me to panic, and I was complying. Eventually, I stumbled into a narrow ravine, walls of roots and vines twisting above me. The whispers became a chorus of voices, some angry, some pleading, some laughing. The childlike figures appeared again, closer than ever, their hollow eyes staring directly at me. One stepped forward, tilting its head unnaturally, mimicking a human curiosity, and my skin crawled. I realized the forest had learned from its prey. It studied them, mirrored their fears, and used them against the living. I had no choice but to keep moving. Behind me, the shadows shifted in unison, and I felt the forest's malevolent awareness tracking every heartbeat, every breath, drawing me deeper into its trap. The forest floor became treacherous, roots and rocks snagging my boots, tripping me repeatedly. Every time I glanced back, the shadows seemed to multiply, stretching unnaturally, creeping closer with every step. The whispers now overlapped with a low hum that vibrated inside my chest, shaking me to my core. I realized the silent woods were not just haunted, they were alive, sentient, and hungry. Suddenly, the childlike figures surged forward, forming a semicircle around me, forcing me into a small clearing. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a physical weight. The forest seemed to close in, the trees leaning toward me, branches twisting like skeletal hands. Then the whispers coalesced into one voice, a chilling monotone that reverberated in my skull. "You belong to us." I dropped to my knees, terrified. But deep inside, a spark of defiance surged. I grabbed a nearby stick, swinging wildly at the figures. Surprisingly, they recoiled slightly, giving me a moment to think. I realized that the forest's power relied on fear and submission. My survival depended on resisting the terror it demanded. I forced myself to rise, gripping the stick like a lifeline. The childlike figures wavered, their pale faces twisted, but they didn't attack directly. Instead, the trees themselves seemed to shift, branches bending toward me as if the entire forest were an extension of these shadowy sentinels. My heart pounded, yet a strange clarity emerged. I realized that the silent woods fed on fear, and any sign of panic would give them power. I took slow, deliberate steps backward, keeping my eyes on the figures, murmuring words of defiance. The whispers turned shrill, overlapping, a cacophony of anger and desperation. Shadows flickered across the clearing, forming grotesque shapes, some mimicking the figures' faces, others twisted beyond comprehension. I knew that the forest had consumed countless people before me, shaping their terror into a tool to ensnare others. Then I saw it, the heart of the forest. A massive, gnarled tree, its roots twisting into the shape of a monstrous, watching face. The childlike figures moved toward it, as if drawn to its power. I realized with horror that confronting the forest's core might be my only chance to survive. Summoning every ounce of courage, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, toward the gnarled tree and the unknown. As I approached the monstrous tree, the shadows surged violently, circling me like a whirlpool of darkness. The whispers became a deafening roar in my mind. "You belong. You belong." The childlike figures dissolved into the fog, replaced by taller, more grotesque humanoids, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. The forest seemed to breathe, the roots writhing like living serpents beneath my feet. I grabbed a length of rope and swung it at the nearest figure, startling it enough to break its advance. In that instant, I ran forward and reached the base of the tree. Its bark felt cold and alive under my hands, pulsing subtly as if acknowledging my presence. I pressed myself against it, whispering words of defiance I barely understood, willing the forest to release its grip. The wind howled, carrying shrill laughter and faint cries. But gradually, the oppressive weight around me lifted. For the first time since entering the silent woods, I felt space and air. The grotesque figures dissolved into the mist, and the forest's pulse slowed. Yet, a deep instinct told me the woods were patient, waiting for the next wanderer, and that Maple Ridge would never be truly safe. I lingered at the base of the monstrous, gnarled tree, panting and trembling. The forest had quieted, but the silence was heavy, almost sentient, as if it were holding its breath. Shadows no longer moved, yet I could feel them watching, lingering just beyond my vision. The whispers had faded, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the tree itself. I realized the forest had tested me. It had measured my fear and my defiance, weighing my will against its ancient hunger. Slowly, I began to back away, careful not to turn my back. The twisted branches above creaked and groaned, but they no longer reached toward me. The ground beneath my feet had softened, roots retracting slightly, and the oppressive fog began to lift. I understood that surviving the silent woods required courage and cunning. It fed on fear and submission. But the forest's awareness remained, a silent predator waiting patiently for its next prey. I glanced once more at the gnarled tree. Its face-like roots seemed to leer, acknowledging my escape, but promising nothing beyond this night. Maple Ridge had survived, and so had I. But at the cost of a lingering dread I knew would never leave me. By sunrise, the woods appeared deceptively peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating fallen leaves and soft moss. But I knew better. The silent woods had not forgotten me. Every step toward town, every breath I took, carried the memory of its sentient presence. I left the forest trembling, but alive, carrying the knowledge that Maple Ridge's quiet beauty masked an ancient, patient evil. Back in town, the locals eyed me warily, as if they could sense what I had endured. I never spoke of the childlike figures, the grotesque humanoids, or the gnarled tree with its watching face. Some things are too dangerous to name aloud. Yet I could never erase the memory from my mind. The silent woods had claimed a piece of me, a shadow I would carry forever. Even now, when I see a dark forest, the same instinct surfaces. A cold dread, a memory of whispers and hollow eyes, and the chilling knowledge that some places in British Columbia are alive, watching and waiting. Maple Ridge had spared me this time, but it would always hunger, always wait, for the next soul foolish enough to wander too far. My name is Ethan Crawford, and this happened one late autumn evening when I was driving along Clearwater Road, a secluded stretch of highway just outside a small British Columbia town. I had heard the rumors, drivers disappearing without a trace, strange lights hovering in the forest. But I dismissed them as overblown stories. The sun was setting, and a thick fog rolled in, giving the road an eerie, otherworldly glow. About an hour into the drive, my headlights caught movement in the trees, glimpses of shadowy figures darting between trunks. I slowed the car, gripping the wheel, heart pounding. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead, and suddenly, the familiar path seemed unfamiliar, distorted. Signs I'd passed countless times appeared twisted or missing, and the trees leaned unnaturally, like sentinels watching my every move. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the fog, pale, motionless, its face hidden beneath a hood. My headlights flickered as if in response to its presence. I tried to keep driving, but the car felt sluggish, almost resisting movement. The whispers started, faint at first. "Ethan, stop! Come closer!" My pulse raced. The road had become a trap, a corridor of shadows that seemed alive, and I realized that whatever lurked here did not want me to leave. I slowed to a crawl, my eyes darting between the fog and the figure, unsure if I should stop or drive through. The whispers grew louder, overlapping like multiple voices echoing in my skull. "Ethan, follow. You belong." My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. But the car continued forward as if compelled. Shadows began to flicker along the roadside, moving unnaturally fast, appearing and disappearing in an instant. I passed an abandoned gas station, windows cracked and dark, yet I could swear I saw movement inside. A silhouette pacing behind the glass, watching me. My stomach churned, and I realized that every familiar landmark along Clearwater Road had shifted subtly, twisted into something unrecognizable. The fog thickened even more, pressing against the car like a living wall, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Then, the hooded figure appeared directly in the middle of the road. My headlights flickered violently, and the engine sputtered as if warning me to stop. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on wet asphalt. But when I blinked, the figure was gone, replaced by a black, rippling shadow that seemed to spread across the road itself. My instincts screamed that I was no longer on a normal highway. Clearwater Road had become a living trap, and I was ensnared. I gunned the engine and swerved around the shadow, heart hammering in my chest. The fog thickened so much that the headlights barely pierced the gloom. Every tree seemed to bend inward, their branches stretching like fingers to claw at the car. My eyes darted constantly, trying to find the road ahead, but the asphalt had begun to warp, rippling like water under the tires. It was as if Clearwater Road itself was alive, feeding on my fear, twisting reality to trap me. Then I saw more figures, tall, thin shapes with glowing eyes, standing along the roadside, motionless yet somehow moving with the shadows. Their eyes tracked me relentlessly, unblinking, and the whispers returned, urgent and overlapping. "Ethan, stop. Belong." My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. But I couldn't stop. The car seemed to accelerate involuntarily, sliding forward despite my efforts. Ahead, a bend in the road dissolved into a wall of fog. Shapes danced within it, too fast to focus on, twisting and coalescing into grotesque forms. I realized the road was no longer linear. It had become a corridor between worlds, a place where normal rules did not apply. Escape seemed impossible, and the weight of the forest and the shadows pressed down on me like a living entity. I slammed my eyes shut for a moment, willing the car to move forward, willing the nightmare to end. When I opened them, the road had changed again. The asphalt was cracked, steaming faintly in the cold night air, and faint outlines of past victims' silhouettes appeared etched into the surface. A chilling realization struck me. Clearwater Road didn't just trap people, it consumed them, leaving traces behind to lure the next traveler. The fog churned ahead, and within it, the hooded figure reappeared, closer than ever. Its presence radiated a cold, intelligent hunger. The whispers had grown louder, now overlapping with guttural, inhuman growls. Shadows at the edge of the fog moved in synchrony, forming a barrier. I tried to reverse, but the car resisted, tires spinning uselessly on the warped asphalt. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized the forest and road were working together to trap me, a living entity that could shape reality to feed its needs. I pressed the accelerator forward, heart in my throat. praying the fog would clear. But as I crossed the next bend, I saw more figures emerging, pale, faceless, and twisted, standing in the middle of the road. I had no choice but to face them, trapped in a nightmare that had no escape. I gripped the wheel with shaking hands, the engine straining as the warped road twisted unnaturally beneath my tires. The faceless figures advanced slowly, deliberately, their movements synchronized like a single organism. The fog pressed against the car, thick and suffocating, and the whispers became a deafening chorus, echoing inside my skull. Ethan, stop, belong. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to focus on one thing: survival. Suddenly, a bright flash erupted ahead, blinding me momentarily. When my vision cleared, the road seemed endless, a ribbon of black asphalt stretching into darkness, with shadows flickering along its edges. I realized that the figures weren't just on the road. They were in the fog, in the trees, in every space my eyes tried to focus on. My mind struggled to comprehend it, and I understood with a chilling certainty that Clearwater Road didn't just trap people. It consumed reality, bending it to its will. I tried to reverse, but the car lurched forward as if resisting me. Then, a shape lunged from the fog directly in front of me. A hooded figure, taller and more imposing than before. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, but the figure didn't flinch. Its presence radiated an almost physical cold, an ancient intelligence that made me realize that escape would require more than speed. It would require cunning and a courage I wasn't sure I had. Desperation surged through me. I realized that Clearwater Road was alive, feeding on fear, bending the forest and asphalt to trap travelers indefinitely. I slammed my hands on the wheel and muttered every rational thought I could, trying to steady my mind. The hooded figure reappeared in the center of the road, flickering in and out of visibility like a mirage. Shadows stretched unnaturally from the trees, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at me. The whispers became voices of past victims, overlapping, crying, pleading, screaming in perfect synchronicity. The figures were no longer just humanoid. They were twisted caricatures, elongated and malformed, faces frozen in silent terror. My chest tightened as the car moved almost on its own, sliding toward the center of the road where the hooded figure waited. My instincts screamed at me to fight, to escape. But the forest and road were working as one entity, intelligent, patient, and relentless. Then, an idea struck me, a desperate gamble. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and waved it directly at the approaching figure. The sudden light caused it to hesitate, its shadow flickering violently. I realized that perhaps the entity, while powerful, reacted to perception. If I could remain calm and assert control, maybe I could survive this living nightmare. I floored the accelerator, tires squealing on the warped asphalt, and aimed the phone's flashlight directly at the hooded figure. It recoiled, its shadowy form distorting like smoke caught in a windstorm. For a moment, the fog seemed to retreat, revealing the road ahead. My pulse raced. I had discovered the key. The entity reacted to focus and attention. Panic gave it strength. Assertion weakened it. But my relief was brief. From the fog, more shapes surged, twisted, faceless humanoids with elongated limbs, converging toward me like predators circling prey. The whispers had become screams, overlapping voices of countless vanished travelers. My headlights flickered violently, and the warped road beneath me heaved, forming cracks and ridges that threatened to throw the car off balance. Every instinct screamed for me to stop, but I knew stopping meant being claimed. With a deep breath, I forced myself to focus, tracing the road with my flashlight, moving with deliberate, unwavering determination. The hooded figure advanced again, but the beam of light slowed it, creating a narrow corridor in the fog. I realized that Clearwater Road's power depended on fear and hesitation. If I could maintain control, I might make it through. My survival depended entirely on calm, focus, and sheer will. I pressed onward, keeping the flashlight steady, guiding the car along the twisted asphalt. The faceless figures hesitated at the edge of the light, flickering between visibility and invisibility. The fog no longer felt suffocating, but it writhed unnaturally around the edges of the beam, as if alive, trying to claw me back. The hooded figure, massive and foreboding, advanced slowly, deliberately, but the beam held it at bay. The whispers had shifted to a low, guttural vibration in my chest, syncing with the heartbeat of the road itself. I realized that the entity, whatever it was, existed simultaneously in multiple layers, shaping the fog, warping the asphalt, and projecting illusions to destabilize my mind. I gritted my teeth and refused to look away, refusing to give in to fear. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, yet somehow a faint glimmer of familiarity appeared, the first sign of the exit. With each cautious, deliberate step forward, the fog thinned and the figures wavered, retreating into the darkness they had once controlled. My muscles burned, my heart screamed, but the realization hit me. I had found the road's weakness. Clearwater Road's grip depended on terror, and as long as I could maintain focus and control, escape was possible. But the final stretch remained treacherous, and I knew the entity would not give up without one last attempt to claim me. The exit shimmered ahead, a faint glow breaking through the suffocating fog. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, every nerve screaming in exhaustion. But I forced myself to remain calm, focusing solely on the path illuminated by the phone's flashlight. The hooded figure surged once more, stretching impossibly as if trying to fill the entire road. Its presence radiated a cold, ancient intelligence, and the whispers intensified into a chaotic chorus of every traveler who had vanished before me. I held the beam steady, aiming directly at it, and it paused, wavering in the air. The faceless, elongated shadows that had once encircled me now dissipated like smoke in the wind, retreating into the fog. My pulse thudded in my ears, every instinct screaming that the road was testing me one final time. I pressed the accelerator and drove forward with deliberate focus, refusing to glance at the shadows that lingered just beyond the light. Step by step, the fog thinned, the warped asphalt flattened, and the road became familiar again. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant hum of wind through the trees. I had survived, but I knew the memory of Clearwater Road. The hooded figure, the faceless shadows, and the sentient fog would haunt me forever. By the time I reached the end of Clearwater Road, dawn was breaking over the forest. The fog had lifted, and the road appeared normal again. Yet I knew the truth. The highway was alive, sentient, and patient. Every twist, every shadow, every distorted landmark had been a trap designed to feed on fear. I had survived only because I refused to give in to panic. Back in town, the locals eyed me with a mixture of suspicion and pity. Some had lost friends or family to the road. Others whispered of strange lights and impossible disappearances. I never spoke of the faceless figures or the hooded entity, but the memory clung to me, a shadow I could never shake. Even now, when I drive on quiet stretches or see a fog rolling across a road, I feel the same dread. The knowledge that Clearwater Road waits, alive, patient, and hungry for the next traveler foolish enough to enter. I escaped that night, but the road never truly lets anyone go. Its presence lingers always in the back of my mind, a warning and a reminder that some paths in British Columbia are far more dangerous than they appear. My name is Sarah Thompson, and this happened one summer when I decided to spend a weekend at Blackwood Lake, a remote area in British Columbia known for its dense forests and eerie quiet. The lake itself was beautiful, almost mesmerizing, reflecting the canopy of trees like a dark mirror. Locals warned me about strange occurrences, boats disappearing, strange figures on the shore at night, but I dismissed them as exaggerations or tourist tales. I was seeking solitude, not realizing I was stepping into a nightmare. The first evening was peaceful. I set up my small cabin, unpacked, and sat by the lake, watching the sunset bleed into the water. But as darkness fell, the air grew heavy, and an unnatural chill rolled off the lake. I noticed ripples on the water, even though there was no wind, no movement, nothing visible. Then I heard it, a soft, melodic hum, almost like a lullaby, floating across the surface. My stomach tightened as I strained to locate the source. But there was nothing, only the water and the forest, still and silent, hiding something I couldn't yet comprehend. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the tree line, moving unnaturally fast. My heart raced. I knew then that the stories were real. Blackwood Lake was not just quiet. It was alive with a presence that watched, waited, and possibly preyed on anyone who dared enter after dark. Night fell fully, and the forest around Blackwood Lake became suffocatingly still. I lit a small lantern inside my cabin, trying to ignore the unease curling in my chest. The humming returned, louder this time, echoing faintly across the water. I stepped outside, lantern in hand, and scanned the lake's surface. The ripples spread unnaturally, forming concentric circles that seemed to move toward the shore, as if something beneath the water was aware of my presence. I walked along the dock, forcing myself to stay calm, when I noticed movement beneath the surface. Shapes gliding just below the water, impossible to identify. My reflection wavered unnaturally in the lantern light, as if it was being distorted by something malevolent. Then, on the far shore, I saw a figure, tall, pale, and faceless, standing among the trees, staring directly at me. My pulse quickened, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. The wind carried whispers through the forest, unintelligible but insistent, pressing into my mind. I wanted to run back to the cabin, but my legs felt rooted to the dock. It became clear that Blackwood Lake was not just haunted, it was sentient, aware of every movement, every thought, every fear. And for reasons I could not yet understand, it had singled me out. Retreated to the cabin, heart hammering. But the presence followed me. The hum persisted, vibrating through the walls as if the entire building was attuned to it. Shadows twisted unnaturally around the corners of the room, stretching and shrinking with a mind of their own. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The lake had awakened, and it was watching me, learning my fears. Curiosity and dread forced me back outside. I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the shoreline. The water was alive with movement. Dark shapes gliding beneath the surface, rippling the reflection of the moonlight. Every ripple seemed purposeful, as if the lake itself was beckoning me closer. My hands shook as I approached the dock, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent, carrying words I couldn't fully understand. Then I saw them. Figures emerging from the water, pale, faceless, their forms partially submerged. They moved with unnatural fluidity, circling the dock, pressing me with an invisible force. My mind screamed to run, but my body froze, paralyzed by fear. I realized that Blackwood Lake didn't just haunt. It controlled, manipulating both perception and reality. Whatever it wanted from me, it wouldn't let me leave until it had my full attention. I stumbled backward, heart racing, trying to regain control of my thoughts. The faceless figures surfaced fully now, their blank, featureless faces staring at me with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. The whispers had become voices, overlapping in a cacophony of warning and command, echoing through the forest and lake simultaneously. I realized the lake had no intention of letting me escape tonight, or perhaps ever. Desperation overtook fear. I grabbed a nearby rowboat tied to the dock, shoving it into the water, hoping to reach the opposite shore. The ripples spread unnaturally, directing the boat as if the lake itself was steering me, guiding me toward something unseen. Every stroke felt heavier than the last, and the shadows moved with me, closing in from all sides. The water churned in unnatural patterns, forming shapes too grotesque to fully comprehend, as if mocking my attempts at escape. Suddenly, a figure emerged in front of me, taller than the rest, hooded and faceless, its form gliding just above the water. The whispering surged into a high-pitched, deafening wail, reverberating through my skull. I had never felt such a pure, malignant awareness. The lake wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was feeding on my terror. Paddling furiously, I tried to put distance between myself and the hooded figure, but the water refused to cooperate. The ripples seemed to push me back toward the center of the lake, guiding my path like a predator controlling its prey. The other faceless figures swirled around me in the water, their blank faces reflecting the moonlight like pale mirrors, following my every movement. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and the cold seeped into my bones despite the warm summer air. Suddenly, the hooded figure rose above the water, towering over the boat, its presence radiating a force that made the oars nearly impossible to lift. The whispers surged into intelligible words. Join us. Belong. Never leave. The voices echoed through my mind, pressing against my sanity. I fought the urge to scream, to abandon all hope, realizing that panic would only feed the lake's power. With trembling hands, I steeled myself, focusing only on one thought. I had to survive. The water beneath me twisted and churned, forming shapes too grotesque to describe, reaching out like dark, grasping hands. The boat rocked violently, and I feared it would capsize. Yet, somehow, my determination forced it forward. For the first time, I glimpsed the opposite shore, faint and shrouded in mist, as if the lake was teasing me with the possibility of escape. The shore grew closer, but the lake was relentless. Shadows rose from the water like living smoke, twisting around the boat and splashing against the sides. The hooded figure's pale, featureless face glowed faintly, its attention fixed entirely on me. Every instinct screamed to stop, to let go. But I pressed forward, gritting my teeth against the bone-deep cold that radiated from the water. The whispers turned into screams of past victims, overlapping into a horrifying symphony, echoing from the trees, the water, and the fog. I realized that Blackwood Lake didn't just haunt people. It consumed them, storing fragments of their fear, their voices, their very essence, to use as weapons against new intruders. The oars felt impossibly heavy, my muscles burning, but I refused to falter. As I neared the mist-covered shore, the hooded figure surged, gliding toward me faster than I thought possible. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the lake would reclaim me, but I held my ground, directing the flashlight toward it. The beam caused the figure to falter, its form flickering and wavering as though unsure of its own existence. The lake shuddered, almost as if acknowledging my defiance. I gritted my teeth, refusing to look away from the hooded figure as it surged toward me. Its presence pressed on me like a physical weight, freezing my limbs and filling my mind with the voices of countless past victims. The faceless figures in the water swirled faster, forming a vortex around the boat that threatened to capsize it. My flashlight flickered, but I kept the beam steady, focusing on the figure directly ahead. The lake seemed to roar in response, waves crashing against the dockless edges of reality, splashing cold water over my arms and face. I realized that Blackwood Lake's power depended on fear, hesitation, and surrender. If I could maintain focus, I might survive. Clenching the oars, I pushed forward with every ounce of strength, ignoring the ghostly hands that rose from the water, stretching toward me, grasping for flesh that no longer existed. The hooded figure paused, hovering above the swirling shadows, as if weighing my will against its own. The whispers had turned to pleading, desperate murmurs, echoing in the dense fog and rattling my very soul. I rowed faster, forcing my eyes forward toward a faint glimmer on the far shore. It was my only hope, a sliver of escape through the lake's oppressive, sentient grasp. The mist thinned slightly as I approached the far shore, revealing jagged rocks and dark trees that seemed impossibly close. The hooded figure surged again, faster this time, gliding effortlessly over the water's surface, sending ripples that rocked the boat violently. The faceless figures shrieked, their echoes blending with the whispering wind, forming a cacophony that threatened to drive me insane. Every muscle in my body burned as I rowed, ignoring the cold that had seeped into my bones and the invisible weight of the lake pressing down on me. My flashlight wavered, but I forced it steady, shining directly on the hooded figure. For the first time, I noticed a flicker of hesitation. Its form warped and wavered, as if unsure of its own power when confronted directly. I realized that the lake, while powerful, had limits. It could manipulate, terrify, and trap, but direct focus and courage could weaken its grip. I pushed forward relentlessly, the far shore drawing closer with every stroke. The shadows and whispers surged for one last assault, but I refused to look away. I knew I was moments from either escape or becoming another whispering victim, trapped forever in Blackwood Lake's sentient grasp. The shore loomed closer, jagged and shadowed. Yet the lake refused to release me without a fight. The hooded figure surged one final time, gliding just above the water with impossible speed. The faceless humanoid swirled around me, forming a vortex that churned the water and tossed my boat violently. The whispers had escalated into a deafening roar, voices of every lost traveler echoing from the lake and forest in a horrifying symphony. I kept my eyes fixed on the figure, my hands shaking as I gripped the oars. The flashlight beam cut through the thick mist, illuminating the hooded entity and causing it to flicker, distort, and hesitate. The ripple of fear that had powered Blackwood Lake weakened slightly as my determination surged. I rowed with every ounce of strength I had left, ignoring the cold that gnawed at my bones and the invisible hands that clawed at the boat. Then, miraculously, I broke the vortex. The water calmed slightly, and the shadows shrieked as the hooded figure faltered, losing cohesion. The faint glow of the farthest trees and the rocky shoreline ahead promised escape. My chest heaved, lungs burning, but the realization hit me. I had survived the lake's wrath, though I knew I was not truly free from its haunting influence. I finally reached the misty shoreline, collapsing onto the rocks as the lake's oppressive energy began to recede. The hooded figure and faceless shapes dissolved into the fog, their whispers fading into an eerie silence. The water was calm once more, reflecting the first hints of dawn in pale silver streaks. I had survived, but the memory of the lake, the faceless figures, the hooded entity, the sentient whispers, would linger forever. Locals warned me afterward about Blackwood Lake, claiming no one truly escapes untouched. I felt it immediately. The haunting presence embedded itself in my mind, a shadow I carried with every step. Even now, when I see a calm body of water, I feel that same weight pressing in, that same whispering voice lurking at the edges of perception. Blackwood Lake had marked me, and though I survived, I knew others would fall victim to its sentient, malevolent embrace. The lake waited patiently, feeding on fear, seeking the next soul brave or foolish enough to wander too close. Some places in British Columbia aren't just haunted, they're alive. And Blackwood Lake was the deadliest of all. My name is David Mercer, and this happened the summer I decided to explore Raven's Hollow, a remote area in British Columbia shrouded in legend. Locals warned travelers to avoid the dense forest and its abandoned settlements, claiming that those who ventured too deep often disappeared without a trace. I was a skeptic, an urban explorer who chased thrill and mystery, unaware that Raven's Hollow had secrets far darker than I could imagine. The first evening was deceptively calm. I set up camp near a clearing, the twisted trees casting long, menacing shadows under the rising moon. A chill rolled through the hollow, unnatural for the season, and the silence was oppressive, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. As night fell, I noticed shadows moving where no light reached, gliding across the underbrush and stretching unnaturally, never fully forming. I dismissed it at first, just tricks of the moonlight. But a growing sense of unease rooted me in place. Then I heard it. A low, guttural whisper, almost imperceptible at first, echoing from multiple directions. I turned quickly, scanning the dense forest, but saw nothing. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, as if a dozen voices were speaking at once, each repeating my name. That's when I realized Raven's Hollow wasn't merely abandoned, it was alive, waiting, aware of my presence. The whispers intensified, echoing through the hollow like a chorus of unseen predators. I gripped my flashlight tightly and scanned the forest. But every time the beam caught a shadow, it shifted, elongating and twisting unnaturally before vanishing into the darkness. My pulse raced as I realized I was no longer the observer. I was being watched, studied, and manipulated by something intelligent and malevolent. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, thin, and entirely black, with no distinguishable features. It moved with unnatural fluidity, gliding across the forest floor without making a sound. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though the earth itself was holding me in place. The whispers swelled into a cacophony, overlapping with guttural, inhuman growls, each one reverberating inside my skull. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and loose rocks, and the shadow seemed to follow me, maintaining a deliberate distance, yet closing the perimeter around my camp. I realized Raven's Hollow wasn't just haunted. It was a predator. Every corner, every tree, every drifting shadow existed to contain, to trap, and perhaps to consume. My fight for survival had just begun, and I knew I was already deep in its grasp. I scrambled to regain my footing, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The shadow moved with eerie precision, never losing sight of me, its black, featureless form stretching between the trees like liquid night. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch sounded amplified, as if the forest itself were conspiring to trap me. My heart pounded, and I realized that running without direction was futile. The hollow had no boundaries I could understand, only corridors of darkness that led deeper into its malevolent core. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Dozens of smaller, humanoid shadows emerging from the darkness, their shapes inconsistent and flickering. They didn't approach yet. They observed, circling silently, forming a tightening perimeter around me. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to breathe, focusing on the single, rational thought that might save me. The shadows reacted to fear. If I gave in, I would become another lost soul in the hollow. I picked a direction, forcing myself to move deliberately, shining the flashlight ahead to assert control. The shadows mirrored my motion, sliding and twisting as if testing my resolve. I realized with dawning horror that the hollow wasn't merely haunted. It was alive, aware, intelligent, and it was assessing me as prey. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches forming grotesque silhouettes in the dim light. The whispers had evolved into guttural, almost inhuman tones, overlapping with indistinct voices that repeated my name. The shadows followed relentlessly, gliding between the trunks, forming patterns that made no logical sense, yet kept me trapped within an invisible maze. I stumbled into a clearing, hoping for a moment of respite, but it offered none. In the center stood the tall, featureless figure, motionless yet commanding, as if it were the alpha of this dark domain. The smaller shadows circled me, skimming along the forest floor with unnatural fluidity. I realized the clearing itself was a trap. The hollow had led me here, orchestrating my every move. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but fear alone would only empower them. I clenched the flashlight, using its beam to assert my presence, forcing the shadows to hesitate. The tall figure leaned slightly forward, and a wave of cold pressed against me like the forest itself was inhaling my life. I understood then that survival depended on cunning and nerve, not speed. One misstep could mean becoming another whisper in Raven's Hollow forever. I backed away slowly from the center of the clearing, keeping the flashlight trained on the tall, faceless figure. The smaller shadows mirrored my movement, skimming across the forest floor like liquid darkness. Every step felt calculated, as if the hollow itself were anticipating my motions, corralling me deeper into its labyrinth. My pulse raced, and sweat dripped down my temple despite the cold night air. The whispers and guttural growls pressed into my mind, an oppressive wave of sound that made focusing nearly impossible. I realized that fear was the hollow's weapon. The more I panicked, the faster the shadows moved, and the taller figure leaned closer, its presence radiating an almost physical force. I forced myself to slow my breathing, to think clearly, and to keep the flashlight steady. The beam seemed to disrupt the shadows slightly, making them hesitate, stretching and wavering as if unsure of their own existence. Then I noticed something else. The forest beyond the clearing, where moonlight spilled between the branches, seemed less dominated by darkness. Perhaps there was a path, a way out, but it would require moving through the center of the clearing, directly in front of the tall figure and the swarming shadows. My only choice was to confront them head-on, or risk becoming just another voice trapped in Raven's Hollow forever. I steeled myself and took a deep breath, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. My footsteps echoed unnaturally in the clearing as I advanced, forcing the shadows to hesitate with each beam of light I directed at them. The tall figure shifted forward, its faceless head tilting as if studying me, evaluating whether I would falter. The oppressive cold pressed against me like a wall, yet I refused to retreat. The smaller shadows surged suddenly, forming a ring that tried to corral me, moving faster than logic allowed, yet the flashlight held them at bay. I forced my legs to move faster, stepping over roots and rocks, shining the beam in arcs to keep the shadows uncertain. The tall figure loomed closer, extending its influence across the clearing. Yet with every confident step I took, its form flickered, distorted, as if struggling against my resolve. The realization hit me hard. The hollow thrived on fear and hesitation. By staying focused, by asserting my presence, I could weaken its hold. My plan was risky, but I pushed forward through the center of the clearing, ignoring the cold, ignoring the whispers, forcing the beam of light straight at the figure. Every heartbeat was a defiance, and I felt the hollow recoil, almost imperceptibly, as I edged toward a way out through the forest beyond. The forest beyond the clearing shimmered faintly under the moonlight, a narrow corridor of hope. Yet the shadows would not release me so easily. The tall, faceless figure advanced, its presence stretching across the clearing like a living void, pressing down on my mind with every step. The smaller shadows surged around me, swirling in unnatural, chaotic patterns that threatened to trap me completely. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding louder than the whispers, as if the hollow sought to drown me in the sound of fear itself. I forced my legs to move faster, shoving aside roots and fallen branches, each step a battle against the supernatural force pressing me down. The tall figure tilted slightly, as though analyzing my resolve. And the smaller shadows hesitated momentarily, their flickering forms uncertain under the beam of my flashlight. The cold was suffocating, the voices inside my head relentless. Yet I pressed forward. Survival demanded focus, courage, and the unyielding will to defy the hollow itself. The clearing seemed to stretch endlessly, a distorted expanse designed to break my spirit. But I fixed my eyes on the faint light of the forest corridor ahead. Every step through the swirling shadows was an act of defiance, a gamble between life and permanent entrapment in Raven's Hollow. I plunged toward the forest corridor, the shadows reacting instantly, surging to block my path with fluid, unnatural motion. The tall figure loomed, featureless and imposing, radiating an almost tangible pressure that pressed on my chest and made each breath a struggle. I swung the flashlight in wide arcs, the beam cutting through the darkness, making the shadows waver, falter, and flicker. Roots and rocks tore at my clothes and scratched my arms. But I ignored the pain, knowing that hesitation meant certain doom. The whispers escalated into a deafening chorus, overlapping with guttural growls, yet my focus remained on the corridor, the sliver of moonlight that promised escape. With every step, I felt the hollow recoil slightly, the faceless figure struggling against my unwavering defiance. Then, in a moment of brutal clarity, I realized the hollow's true power. It fed entirely on fear, confusion, and surrender. By pressing forward with unbroken focus, I could disrupt its control. I sprinted the last few meters, my flashlight beam illuminating the corridor fully, the tall figure and shadows retreating into the depths of the clearing, their forms distorting and fading into darkness. For the first time, I glimpsed the forest beyond, real and tangible, a passage to freedom. But the memory of Raven's Hollow would linger forever. I burst from the corridor into the deeper forest beyond, my lungs burning and heart hammering like a drum. The moonlight spilling through the branches revealed a path, real, solid, and safe, or so I hoped. Behind me, the clearing seemed to pulse, shadows writhing and flickering as if Raven's Hollow itself resented my escape. I could feel the pressure of its gaze at my back, a constant, invisible weight trying to drag me back into darkness. Every step I took felt like a victory and a gamble. The whispers followed me, now distant but persistent, a haunting reminder that the Hollow never truly let go of its prey. The tall, faceless figure no longer followed, Yet I knew it was still there, observing, waiting for another mistake. I forced myself to run, ignoring the roots that tore at my boots, the branches that scratched my arms, and the cold that gnawed at my bones. Somewhere deep in the forest, the swirling shadows dissipated into the mist, leaving only the oppressive memory of their presence. My relief was tempered with fear. I had survived, but Raven's Hollow had marked me. Its awareness lingered, a shadow behind every tree, a whisper in every wind gust. I had escaped the forest physically, yet its grasp on my mind was far from broken. Finally, the path opened into a small, abandoned village at the forest's edge. The oppressive presence of Raven's Hollow began to fade, though a lingering chill remained in the air. I collapsed against a crumbling wall, exhausted, every muscle trembling, and tried to comprehend what I had endured. The whispers had become faint echoes, but their memory clawed at my thoughts like invisible hands. Even as dawn broke, painting the village in pale orange light, I felt the hollow's awareness following me. Locals later told me the forest claimed more than just bodies. It claimed minds, leaving survivors haunted for life by shadows and whispers that no one else could see. I understood now. Some places are alive, and they feed on more than flesh. They feed on fear, uncertainty, and hope itself. Raven's Hollow wasn't just a forest. It was a predator, patient and eternal, and I had been lucky enough to escape its grasp. I left Raven's Hollow with my life intact, but its shadow lingered in every reflection, every whisper of wind, and every darkened corner. Some places should never be entered, and some shadows should never be challenged. My name is Laura Finch, and the summer I moved to Maple Creek, I thought I was escaping city life for peace and quiet. Maple Creek was a small, isolated town in British Columbia, surrounded by dense forests and narrow, winding roads. Locals were friendly, but spoke in hushed tones about strange disappearances over the years. They warned me about walking the outskirts at night, about the dense fog that rolled in unexpectedly, but I dismissed it as small-town superstition. The first evening was serene. The creek near my cabin glimmered under the fading sunlight, birds chirped, and the air smelled of pine. But as night fell, an unnatural silence descended, heavier than any forest quiet I had ever known. The fog rolled in suddenly, thick and cold, swallowing trees and fences alike. That's when I noticed something odd. A figure standing motionless on the far bank of the creek, completely still, watching me. My flashlight was in the cabin, and I felt a shiver creep up my spine. I told myself it was a hiker or a local, but instinct screamed otherwise. The figure didn't move when I called out. When I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the thick, rolling fog and the unsettling echo of a presence that shouldn't exist in the peaceful night. The next night, I couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, the fog seemed to thicken, curling around the cabin like living smoke. I kept my flashlight close, but I noticed the beam would often catch glimpses of movement, shadowy figures disappearing when I blinked, reflections in the water where nothing should be. The townsfolk's warnings replayed in my mind. Never wander near the creek at night. The fog takes people. I had laughed at the cautionary advice before, but now fear gnawed at me. One evening, I heard a child's laughter echoing through the fog. My heart jumped. Maple Creek had only a few residents, and none of the houses nearby had children. I called out, but the laughter faded instantly, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from the creek itself. The air grew colder, my breath fogging in the dim light. Something unseen brushed past my arm, but when I turned, there was nothing. By then, I realized Maple Creek wasn't merely a quiet town. It was a trap, a place where the fog could conceal malevolent entities. My instincts screamed for me to leave, yet I was inexplicably drawn to the creek, as if the fog and the figures within were testing my resolve, waiting for me to slip into their grasp. The fog grew thicker each night, creeping into my cabin as if it had its own will. I began to notice strange shapes forming within it, elongated silhouettes that darted between trees and floated just above the water. Their movements were unnatural, smooth, and deliberate, unlike any animal or person I had ever seen. My flashlight only made them pause, hesitate, or twist unnaturally before vanishing. Every step toward the creek felt like walking into a predator's den. Yet some inexplicable force drew me closer, compelling me to witness the unseen horrors. One evening, I saw the figure again, this time standing at the edge of the creek, motionless yet perfectly illuminated by the moonlight. My instincts screamed to run, but my feet felt heavy, rooted to the ground. The fog swirled around the figure, obscuring its form yet emphasizing its presence. And I realized it wasn't just watching, it was studying me. The laughter and whispers returned, overlapping with faint, distorted cries, echoing across the water like remnants of those who had vanished before me. Panic surged, but I forced myself to step backward, my mind racing for a strategy. The fog reacted instantly, thickening and curling like it had a pulse, closing in to corral me. Maple Creek had a rhythm, a predatory intelligence, and I was beginning to understand how easily it could consume anyone who underestimated it. That night, I decided to follow the fog's pull, hoping to understand its patterns before it could claim me entirely. As I approached the creek, the water glimmered unnaturally, reflecting shapes that weren't there. The laughter returned, this time closer, almost beside me, though no one was visible. My flashlight flickered, and I caught fleeting glimpses of figures stepping in and out of existence, their forms stretching impossibly before vanishing into the mist. A chill ran down my spine as the whispering intensified, voices overlapping, layering over one another in a symphony of dread. I realized with horror that the fog wasn't just concealing the figures, it was part of them. It moved with intention, its twists and curls directing my steps, herding me toward a specific area along the creek. The water churned as if alive, black shadows forming on its surface, moving in sync with the fog. I felt my pulse quicken as I stepped closer to the water's edge. The fog seemed to reach out, curling around my arms, tugging at me. I fought to stay upright, realizing that if I let my fear control me, Maple Creek would claim me completely, just as it had taken so many others before me. My survival depended on courage, speed, and the ability to outthink the fog itself. The fog seemed almost alive, curling around my legs and arms, tugging at me with a force I could not resist. The shadows on the water's surface multiplied, stretching into grotesque humanoid shapes that twisted and writhed as if testing my courage. I tried to shine my flashlight directly at them, but they flickered, distorting, and seemed to merge back into the fog whenever I looked away. It was then I understood that Maple Creek didn't just conceal its horrors, it controlled them. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to focus. Every instinct screamed to flee. But the fog responded instantly, closing paths and making the creek bank twist impossibly before my eyes. I realized it was intelligent, sensing my fear and feeding on it. The laughter had returned, high-pitched and distorted, mingling with whispers that now repeated my name. The creek wasn't just water. It was a mirror for the missing, a doorway for the fog's victims, and I could feel the weight of all those lost souls pressing toward me. I clenched my flashlight like a lifeline and moved deliberately along the bank, forcing my fear into determination. The shadows hesitated slightly, writhing in agitation, and I felt a fragile sense of control. But I knew the creek had only allowed a moment's advantage. Its true test had yet to come. I pressed forward, every step deliberate, eyes fixed on a narrow opening where the fog appeared thinner. The shadows darted around me, forming a chaotic, living barrier. Yet I forced the beam of my flashlight into their midst. The flickering figures shrieked, distorted, echoing sounds that penetrated my mind, and the fog swirled with unnatural velocity. I realized that if I stopped moving, the creek would claim me, pulling me into its watery depths to vanish like so many others. The water churned violently, black shapes leaping from the surface and dissolving into the mist as I passed. Each movement I made had to be precise, calculated. Hesitation meant instant doom. The whispers were relentless now, overlapping with the distorted laughter of children, grown adults, and unidentifiable voices, all warning me to turn back. My chest burned, muscles screamed, but I forced my legs forward. At last, I glimpsed the edge of the fog. A sliver of dry land illuminated faintly by moonlight. The creek roared around me, the fog swirling as if attempting a final grasp. I lunged toward the opening, shoving through the last tendrils of mist, feeling the cold, wet fingers of Maple Creek's darkness brush against my skin. I had survived the immediate danger, but I knew the memory of this night would haunt me forever. The moonlight spilling over the distant tree line offered the first real glimmer of safety, but the fog refused to release me. It twisted around my legs and arms, curling like living tendrils, and the black shapes on the water's surface surged with renewed intensity. Every step I took felt like a battle against an unseen predator that anticipated my every move. My flashlight flickered, threatening to fail, and for a moment, I feared that darkness would overtake me completely. Then, the laughter became deafening, layered with shrill whispers, and the fog thickened into a wall of impenetrable white. I stumbled, nearly falling into the creek, and the black figures leapt toward me. But each time, I forced myself upright, shining the beam directly at them. The fog recoiled slightly, almost as if offended by my defiance. I realized the fog responded not to my movement, but to my fear. If I maintained courage, I could weaken it enough to escape. I forced myself to focus, heart hammering, every nerve alert. The narrow path ahead was still visible, a fragile corridor through the relentless darkness. I sprinted, shoving through the fog, ignoring the cold that bit into my bones and the whispers clawing at my mind. Maple Creek was testing me, but I refused to let it win. The final stretch to safety felt like an eternity. The fog surged one last time, forming grotesque, towering shapes that blocked my path, their twisted forms reflecting countless vanished souls. The creek churned violently, water lapping at the edges of the narrow corridor, threatening to pull me in. I could hear the chorus of distorted laughter and whispers building to a crescendo, as if the forest itself were roaring in anger at my defiance. I focused all my energy on the path, pushing forward with every ounce of strength. The shadows hesitated when the beam of my flashlight struck them directly, wavering and distorting before dissolving into the swirling mist. With one final burst of adrenaline, I lunged through the last wall of fog, feeling the tendrils brush against me but failing to hold me. The creek's roar faded, the laughter diminished, and the black shapes dissolved entirely into the night. For the first time, I felt solid ground beneath my feet, dry and safe, though my body trembled from exhaustion. The fog had released me, but its presence lingered in the air, a reminder that Maple Creek's darkness was patient, intelligent, and eternal. I had survived, but I knew that the creek would always remember me, and I would never forget it. I stumbled away from the creek, my legs weak and shaking, every breath ragged but alive. The fog that had tormented me seemed to thin, retreating slowly into the forest as if displeased by my defiance. Yet, I could still feel its presence lingering in the air, pressing lightly against my skin, whispering in a language I could not comprehend. Maple Creek had released me physically, but the memory of its sentience and hunger would remain with me forever. I glanced back toward the creek, where the black shapes had vanished. And for a fleeting moment, the water's surface reflected countless faces, pale and distorted, all staring directly at me. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting in fear and disgust, knowing that the missing from Maple Creek had been claimed entirely. Not just their bodies, but their very essence had been absorbed into the fog. I shivered, realizing how easily it could have been me. Somewhere in the distance, the first hints of dawn broke over the treetops. I moved toward the faint light, each step a reminder that the world still existed beyond the darkness of the creek. But the creek had marked me, and I could feel the shadow of its grasp lingering in every part of me. Survival had come at a price: my sanity. Weeks later, I returned to Maple Creek briefly, compelled to confront the lingering terror. The fog appeared innocuous in daylight, drifting lazily over the creek, but I knew better. It had patience, and it waited. As I walked past the cabin where I had stayed, the whispers returned. Not loud, not insistent, but faint, subtle, just enough to make me shiver. I realized then that Maple Creek didn't let go entirely. It fed on memory, on fear, on the knowledge that its victims had survived but were forever changed. I left Maple Creek for good that day, carrying with me the memory of the fog, the shadows, and the chilling understanding that some places are alive in ways we cannot comprehend. The creek had claimed countless souls, yet it allowed me to survive, perhaps to warn others, perhaps as a test. But the lesson was clear. The fog of Maple Creek is patient, cunning, and eternal. One misstep, one moment of fear, and it could claim anyone. Even now, years later, I still feel its cold tendrils brushing against my mind, a reminder that some darkness never truly fades. As the sun sets over the small towns of British Columbia, we are left with more questions than answers. 7 lives, 7 tales, 7 encounters with darkness that stretches far beyond comprehension. From the shadowed forests of Raven's Hollow to the fog-choked waters of Maple Creek, each story reminds us that some places are alive with a hunger we cannot see, and some shadows are patient, waiting for the next unwary traveler. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are documented encounters, accounts of ordinary people who faced the extraordinary, who survived or barely survived the relentless grip of the unknown. The horrors of these small towns are real, persistent, and silent witnesses to a world that thrives in darkness. If tonight's stories have left your heart racing, remember this: the forests, the creeks, the abandoned streets, these places exist beyond our understanding, and the darkness in them does not sleep. Some shadows are eternal, some fogs are alive, and some horrors linger long after you think they are gone. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.